So we're in week 5. This is our last week, actually, of our series, The Fight. And for the past 5 weeks, we've been discovering Paul's words to Timothy. And we've been training with Timothy, if you will. And Timothy's a younger man who's being coached by an older, more mature follower of Jesus named Paul. And Paul writes 2 letters to Timothy. He writes 2 letters, and in both of these letters, he encourages Timothy to do something that's profoundly insightful, but a huge gap from the first century to the 21st century. He simply tells Timothy throughout both of these letters, Timothy, fight. But he doesn't leave it there. He tells Timothy to fight, but make sure, Timothy, as you're fighting, and in your fighting, you're going to be upholding this thing we call faith. You're going to be keeping faith alive and what it means to have faith as a follower of Jesus, and also the concept of faith that drives us. And we outlined the difference between our faith, having a belief in something, and then the faith. So he tells this young leader, Timothy, fight so that you can keep faith alive. But he doesn't end there. He tells Timothy to fight, but make sure, Timothy, that you are fighting the good fight. Fight the good fight. I saw this in action about 2 decades ago. I was finishing up some undergrad studies at Johnson University in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I was a commuting student the last 3 semesters. And my commute was 2.5 hours one way. It was 5 hours round trip. And there were about 3 weeks left. I had taken most of the finals. Most of the grades were in, except for 2 courses of mine. And I was about 3 weeks away from graduating. 4 years, devotion and commitment. I was 3 weeks from graduating. But as a commuting student, I was drained. I was zapped. Where we lived at the moment, it was 4:45 a.m. morning for me, 5 days every single week, round trip commute. And I remember being about 3 weeks out, and my dad had come over for dinner. And he was leaving, and the conversation was just evolving and then deteriorating with the night. And my dad's standing at our back door, and he's about to leave, and the door's open. He's got the door held, and it's open, and I'm there. And I just relayed to him that I'm probably going to end my collegiate journey. I just don't have it in me. And I remember my father locked eyes with me, and he said, "Oh, no. Yes, you are going to finish. You spent over 3 years devoting yourself to this. And it's going to be very difficult, but you are going to finish. You can do this." There's something about a father. There's something about a father locking eyes with a son or a daughter. There's something about a man who steps into a situation and says, yes, you can, and yes, you will. You got this. And there's no more important arena to do our battle against destructive influences and to guard those that have been entrusted to our care than the family arena. So that's why Paul, moving into chapter 5 of 1 Timothy, he's going to elevate the stakes when it comes to fighting the good fight and keeping faith alive. And he's going to illustrate to Timothy that the stakes are so high when it comes to family. Actually, he words it this way in 1 Timothy 5:8. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, especially those of their own household, and notice this language, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Now, while that may sound like an insult, Paul isn't necessarily throwing punches here. Instead, he's simply comparing and saying, hey, people who don't follow our Lord Jesus, people who don't follow the ways of our leader, Jesus Christ, they still nurture and provide for their families. So those of us who are followers of Christ, if we fail to provide and provide necessary forethought for our families, then we're actually denying our faith, and we're worse than those outside, because at its core, Christianity is relational. At its core, Christianity is relational. And when you come and you bring family into the dynamic, this is a reference by Paul that elevates the reality that a core component of following Jesus is providing for your family. And you probably noticed that it was especially those of your own household. Now, we read about this language, and this is a really good point, and I want you to get this. If you get 1 or 2 things this morning, this is one of the 1 or 2 things I want you to get. We read this especially language. Again, this comes from Galatians 6, where Paul says, if you have an opportunity to do good, then do good to all people, comma, especially those who belong to the household of faith. In other words, when we read this especially language, especially those of the household of faith, especially those of your own household, when we read those words, what is happening is that Paul is underscoring that there are some people in your life that need to feel that you see them as more important than you see other people. That's just a relational reality. Anytime I do a wedding, on the wedding day, during the script that I have written out for the new couple, I always drop a line, something like this. I'll look at the bride and the groom and I'll say, listen, tomorrow morning, when your heads pop off those pillows, there is no person on this planet more important than the person looking back at you. My daughter, Sophie, is a very fierce young lady, and she underscores this idea of especially really well. There are some times when I go out and she knows I have like this very gung-ho ambition about me, especially when it's relationally driven. I just love people. But she will remind me, and she's been doing this for years, her line is something like this: hey, Daddy, remember, when you're out there saving the world, we need you too. There are some people in your life who need you, and they need you to make them feel more important. So when we read this phrase, household, we call this a household code, if you will. And they're sprinkled throughout the New Testament. There's several of them. You'll read one in Romans, you'll read one in 1 Peter, one in Titus. But there are two of these household codes that pop up. And usually the author, in presenting this code, simply identifies the different people who would be in the household. And you could think of household as those under your own roof, that you have a daily impact, a daily influence in your life with, or your immediate family, if you will. So that's the especially. And this household code, when the author writes, he'll address everyone involved. He'll address the parents, or the husbands, or the wives, or the mothers, or the fathers, and two in particular speak directly to fathers, Ephesians and Colossians. So in Ephesians, and I want you to notice that when we read these, both of them elevate or emphasize this emotional dynamic. In other words, there's this vibe that is valued by the family that the father steps into and has an enormous influence over in just the family vibe. So Ephesians 6 and Colossians 3, Ephesians 6 would say, fathers, don't exasperate your children. I remember early on when Christian had his first Bible. I can't find the picture. I'd love to show it to you. But I remember seeing him on the side of the bed one day. He was like nestled in between the wall and his bed. And he had this Bible and it was open. And he was actually in Ephesians chapter 6. I have no idea why he was reading that. But he's reading that. And I'm like, hey, big guy, what you reading? What is this? And he shows it to me. And he had it underlined. And I think it was in red. And I think the word exasperate was circled. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. And that was his life verse for the next few years. Putting a lot of responsibility on me. But that's true. Fathers can indeed exasperate their children. Or Colossians 3, fathers, do not embitter your children. If you do, they run the risk of becoming discouraged. In other words, there is an enormous influence or impact that fathers have upon the vibe with their children and their family. So if that's true, I've got a book here called The Love Dare, and some of you have probably heard of that. The Love Dare became really popular about 20 years ago, something like that. And it's basically a 40-day journey through a relationship that is most important to you. And typically, these are presented to husbands and wives. And it's just a day-by-day, 40-day devotional where you will do just 1 or 2 pages of reading. And then there will be a prompt at the end of that section that inspires you to do something extremely practical or tangible for your spouse. Well, this is called the Love Dare for Parents. And I'm reading through this, thinking about my life. This is my personal copy. And I'm thinking about Madison Hills and the men at Madison Hills. And 3 of these came to my mind. And I've been praying over these and sorting through them. And I want to present them as a dare to all of the fathers, all of the men, And then all of us in regards to our families. Because if we're not providing, we're not fighting. So we're actually denying the faith. So I want to read through these, just three, and it'll be kind of brief. And I want you to make a commitment in your own heart and mind. I want you to accept one of these three dares as a personal challenge, to use this as an opportunity for you to begin providing afresh, anew, providing necessary forethought for your family. When I think about what my dad was doing at the door some time ago, that's exactly what he was doing. He was weighing everything I was saying and glancing into the future and saying, no, the decision you make now is going to have an enormous influence and impact on your future, David. And he was providing necessary forethought for me. So the first one is kind of simple, and I'm thinking in a room this size with us and the various demographics that we have here, I bet one of these is going to be extremely important and valuable in your relational dynamic with your family. So the first one is this: take some time in prayer to identify and then eliminate any hurdle of selfishness in your life that may be keeping you from loving your children more effectively. That's powerful. You know, we all have this emotional investment with the people we love. We feel it. But sometimes that emotional investment, it doesn't play out in the most effective way. So those that you love most, especially your children if you're a father, are there any hurdles in the way that is preventing you from loving them so much more effectively so that they're not exasperated or embittered, but they're feeling the fullness of what you bring to the table? I had to internalize this early on in my marriage. I remember Michelle telling me early on, once we started having children and we were evolving with this family dynamic and it was expanding, she was like, David, I don't think you realize that you set the mood in the family. And over the years, I've seen just how true that is. My family feeds off of my energy. So what is the hurdle preventing you from actually loving them so much more effectively? What energy are you bringing? Now, the second one, and this may really extend to children who aren't small anymore, and maybe not even adolescent, but maybe young adult or moving into adulthood. But this is for those of us who have children that are out in the world, and there's just been a gap that is so unnecessary and maybe heartbreaking. So, love dare number 2, search your heart. Search your heart for any unresolved anger or unforgiveness against your children. And granted, that may not be for the majority of us. That may be for a few of us. And I want to make sure you get the help you need if that's true. Search your heart for any unforgiveness or anger against your children. Write down their name and the list of offense. And then cross out what they've done with permanent ink, and say aloud from your heart, I choose to forgive you. And that's your way of moving forward. The third love dare, reach out to your children. And this is a big one. The responsibility always falls on the leader. And as parents, we're leaders in our family. So reach out to your children one by one and tell them that you want to be closer to them than you are right now. And again, maybe that's true for children that are just a little bit older, maybe even young adults. But call them. You take the lead. You take the initiative. Reach out and say, I don't know what's happened. There's been a little bit of a drift, but I want to be so much closer to you than we are right now. Or early on, when my children were growing, I developed this question and I started asking them. And I've asked it over the years, and I think it's one of those questions that I ask and I mean every single time. And when I ask this question, it's becoming met with like eye rolls, like, of course, you know the answer to this or whatever, but it may be of value to you. And it's simply this. I will lock eyes with my children and I'll ask them, hey, is there anything you feel you need that I'm not giving you? I understand that I am an enormous influence in your life. I'm your father. So is there anything that you feel you need that I'm not giving you? So I hope you took one of those dares. And if you did, or if you want to know more about this, first one to ask me, brand new copy. This is yours. I'm walked through it a couple of times. It's a phenomenal journey that really elevates this relational dynamic, and it helps you with some just practical tools and thoughts for 40 days. And it's written so well that once you get through it, you can circle back and go through it again. So again, if you want this copy, just see me right after service. So as we're moving forward, does anybody know this face right here? Can anybody reference this? You know this guy? He has blown up on social media. He's a business guy, very influential in the business community. He's at all the conferences, just a huge name. His name's Grant Cardone. And I was watching this guy on a video clip not too long ago, and he's talking about his family, and he's got a young daughter who's she's super ambitious in the business world, and she's moving up corporate ladders and starting stuff, and she's just very engaging. But he's talking to her because someone yelled to the crowd when she's speaking. Someone yelled from the crowd, "Hey, I love you." And from the side, Grant simply says, "Hey, she's too young for you. Don't make me do something I don't want to do, because I'll do it, then I'll have to go to jail for the rest of my life." And it's just this really cool clip of a father stepping in and being super protective of their child. And I want you to know that as a parent, I bet you get that. And I want you to know that when Grant said that, like he would put this body in the ground if someone messed with his daughter, I feel that. You feel that, Sean? You get that. And I feel it on such a deep level. I want you to know that it really resonates with me. However, I also recognize that if one of my daughters was in a destructive moment that was extremely damaging, she doesn't need another double dose of destructiveness by having her father removed from the daily rhythm of her life. And I'm going somewhere extremely important with this. That's why, gentlemen, men, that's why Paul tells Timothy to fight, but fight the good fight, Timothy. Don't fight something that isn't worth your time. Provide necessary forethought because the future's unfolding and you don't want to make a decision now that's going to disrupt what should be or what could be in your future. So fight, but fight the good fight. And when we look at that idea of providing for your family, the word provide, it literally means necessary forethought. In other words, when you're providing for those that you love most, those that need you desperately, you're looking at them, and it's more than food and clothing. You're considering their life. You're a student of those people. You understand how they operate, how they work. You understand what they bring to the table. You understand what they need. You understand the nuances of their life. You understand them. You get them. So you're thinking about what you need to provide for them in advance. There's this great video clip, Facebook Reel. It's phenomenal. It's only about 20 seconds long. I want you to check it out because it has a powerful meaning, and I think it gets to the heart of what I'm talking about with Grant Cardone's comment. But check this out.
Men are always quick to say, "I die for my family." Sure, okay. But would you exercise for them? Would you eat healthy for them? Would you sleep early and rise early for them? Would you chase your dreams for them? Would you quit your bad habits for them? In other words, would you live for them?
So quick, 20 seconds, but just a shot of wisdom. And it's a big trend on social media right now, simply saying, guys, gentlemen, men, fathers, we are so quick to say, "Oh, I would die for my family. I'd take a bullet for them." Oh yeah, we all get that. You feel that in the room. You know that. And if you're not a man, you know that about the men in your life. They'd take a bullet for you without thinking twice. But when we think like that, we're putting the emphasis upon us. When you think about dying for your family, the emphasis is upon me. But when you think about living for your family, then the emphasis is upon them. And that is a critical distinction. So you fight, but you fight the good fight with wisdom and clarity so that you are involved and you're providing and you're not taken out of the necessary daily influence. Fair? Makes sense? We're good? Gentlemen? Yeah? Tricky? Complicated? Complex? I get it. But that's the shift we have to make. So with the time we have left, let me address three groups. I want to address all the men in the room right now. Then we'll get to some other people. Just want to address all the men. Well, we just did that. I want to address everyone. Okay, let me address everyone. Just did all the men, everyone. So if you'll remember, this phrase pops up. Anyone who doesn't provide for their family, especially those of their own household. So this applies to anyone. I want you to know I've been a pastor long enough to realize that the very first form of community God created was a family. You go back to the very beginning in Genesis 1, 2, and 3, and the first form of community that God created was a family. But through the centuries, the family dynamic has been eroded. And it's been eroded, leaving men and women and youth in passionate pursuit of community. And that family breakdown is where a place like Madison Hills breaks in. And we step up. So if you are part of a dynamic where the family has been eroded and you are here, I want you to know that you have found the right place. Just prior to this passage in 1 Timothy 5:8, Paul starts this section out in chapter 5, verses 1 and 2, underscoring the family dynamic of a local church like Madison Hills Christian Church. He actually starts off and he was like, don't ever, ever, ever rebuke an older man harshly. Instead, you talk to him like he was your father. And then he goes on and he says, and older women, talk to them like they're your mother. And younger men, talk to them like they're your brothers. And younger women, talk to them like they're your sisters, because there's a family dynamic that happens here. So if you're someone who's on the marginalized, outlying realm of family because your family has been eroded, we're so glad that you're here. And please see me after service, because there are people here that want to come alongside of you and engage you in the community that you are in passionate pursuit of. Last group I want to address are our elders. I know we have a few out of town, and I know they don't like stuff like this, but if you're an elder here, would you mind to just stand up? If you're one of our elders, will you stand up? Yeah, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the house, got a couple out. So these are our elders, and here's what I've discovered over the past couple of years working with them. I've discovered that these guys right here passionately love their families. I've seen it in action. And not only do they love their family, they love the family here at Madison Hills. This is so important because when Paul is talking about leadership in the local church, and you'll remember Paul is telling Timothy, like we've talked before, the churches are expanding. The gospel is moving out of Jerusalem into other areas, so local churches are popping up and they need structure. So Paul is writing to Timothy to create that structure. And he says you need elders who come along. We also have a group of men we call deacons. So if we have any deacons in the house, would you please stand up? These are some of our men who what we would call upper leadership. And I've had conversations with these men. I've listened to them talk. I've watched them behave. And they love their families. And here's why that's important. And here's why I want to recognize them. Paul is writing and he's telling Timothy about elders and the qualifications or the characteristics or the attitudes or the personalities that they should present in a local church. You can read about this in chapter 3 of 1 Timothy. And he's just riding along, like listing characteristic after characteristic after characteristic. And then he has this parenthetical note where it's like a side note where he's thinking out loud or underscoring a point. And then he drops this line. He was like, if anyone, this is 1 Timothy 3:5, if anyone doesn't know how to manage or care for their own family, how can they lead in God's church or God's household? So you have some leaders in this local community of faith, this family. You have some leaders who take that seriously. And they've learned how to manage their families and how to love them so they know how to bring that to Madison Hills. So as throughout the New Testament tells us, could we take just a moment to honor these men? Thanks for setting the example and setting the bar high and bringing that kind of leadership and keeping that faith alive and fighting that good fight for us here at Madison Hills. Thank you guys so much. So to finish up here, I don't know how old everybody is or anything like that. I grew up in the 80s, and I would argue that it was just the greatest decade ever. I love the 80s. I love everything about it. I follow several pages on social media back to the 80s. I was watching one a couple of days ago, and this dude, it was like 45 seconds. He's just showing Trapper Keeper after Trapper Keeper after Trapper Keeper. And I'm like, I had that one. It was phenomenal. Just loved the vibe and everything. But anyway, there were a lot of goofy movies in the 80s too. And one that I grew up watching was The Beastmaster. I don't know if anybody knows this movie. It's kind of scarce and whatever, but I love this movie. If it was a Saturday or a Tuesday night and I'm flipping through the channels and this popped on, wherever it was in the movie, I wanted to watch it. It's just a hokey 80s movie, okay? Some of you would think it was so cringe, but I loved it. So a few weeks ago, I watched it again. I was like, oh my gosh, I remember this movie was so good, and it freaked me out too. It had a couple of scenes that just freaked me out as a kid, but I loved it. But my favorite scene comes at near the end of the movie with this guy right here, Dar, who is kind of an out-of-town guy, comes in and he's going to save this community, but he's actually standing on a little temple in the area. And there are a big horde of bad guys that are on the way. Like you can see the rustle of the sand coming up from the distance. You know, it's set in a desert area. And the bad guys are coming. And this guy's like halfway up this little temple area. And all the people are looking to him. And he has to make a call. And this scene right here, he just looks out at everybody. And he simply says, "We will fight." And I love that moment, because you can see in everyone's eyes and the whole disposition and demeanor of the community that that's the right call. Is it going to be tough? Well, probably. Is it going to be challenging? Well, of course. But they do need to fight. And when he goes, "We will fight," it's so good. It's like the best part of the movie. And when you think about it, there's only like 8 minutes left of the movie after that. It's like the end of the movie when he says that. But if you think about the story, well, it's just the beginning. I mean, they do fight, and it affects their future. The stakes are high, and they can move forward. And the same is true for you and I this morning. It's not the end. This moment right here is just the beginning, because we're going to leave. And you and I, when it comes to faith, and our family, we will fight. God, you're so good. And we see through the pages of your word how you have fought for us. And we owe eternity to you. So we thank you, Father, for showing us what the good fight really is. For showing us as men that we're so passionate about the people we love, that we need to make sure we're providing for them with necessary forethought, so we're not taken out of the way, but we're actually giving them everything they need daily. And Father, whether that's fathers, or just husbands, just men, we're thankful, Father, for the example you've set for us and what you've called us to do for the people we love. And then that extends to anyone and everyone, though, who has family. We are all called to take these dares to reconcile the relationships that have been distorted because of some relational rift. And we're to take the lead on reaching out, making things right, and loving our families effectively. And we trust that you'll help every one of us do that, because it's going to be different for every single one of us. And we trust, Father, that your word just went forth this morning, and it's affected all of us in the right way. And now we know what to do. We know how to fight, but not just fight. We know how to fight the good fight. So for all of the work you've done over the past 5 weeks in our hearts and minds and in our lives, our faith and our families, we're thankful, Father. And we thank you so much for our Lord, our leader, Jesus Christ, because it's through him and his teachings and his ways that we know you're good and that you can be trusted. You're a good Father, and we praise you for that. In his name, amen.